We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Monday Mashup. This is Robert Phoenix. It is 9/17/2012, and it's 10:03 here where I am speaking to you from on the edge of America, the left coast of the United States, California. My home for now, but not for too much longer, as I get ready to make my exodus out of the state and into some other state, whatever that state will be. I mean, most people know where I'm moving, but I'm using state as a metaphor, not as an actual state. So here we go. Things are heating up, boys and girls. Pay attention. We are headed into the funnel, and the funnel is October surprise. October 1st, by the way, is when the military budget comes up for renewal, and everything else around the Obama budget comes up from renewal. It is the end of the fiscal year for the feds, and what happens after that is anybody's guess, but we can be sure that this flurry of activity in the Middle East with what happened in Libya at the consulate there has prompted the Obama administration and every single lobbyist inside of a 5-mile radius of Capitol Hill that more and more money needs to be spent on defense, offense. They always call it defense. But it's not really defense because we're on the offense. We're on the offensive. The amount of conflagration and conflict and, for lack of a better term, war has been big business, and it's been big business for a very long time, and it has gone through the roof ever since 9/11/2001, and with this event staged just weeks before the budget comes up for review, the call for more dollars to be spent both domestically and abroad, or abroad and domestically, or you're going to hear it. You're going to hear it loud and clear. And what's really interesting about these budgets that get passed is that there are things inside those budgets that get hidden. And we don't know until generally after the fact what takes place or what's being buried in those budgets. And I'm going to tell you right now, the big ticket item in 2013 is going to be personal identification. You wait, it's coming, and it's going to coincide with the National Health Care Act, aka Obamacare, and the first thing that people are going to be issued is going to be a card of some sort. It will be some sort of medical identification card, which, by the way, will contain some form of biometric identification. Now, it will be a fingerprint maybe at the beginning. It may even be a splotch of your own DNA that's going to be on that card. And by the way, the police they're being armed, so to speak, with DNA collectors. So they can pull you over and theoretically pull your DNA right from you. They'll just take a swab and they'll stick it inside your mouth, and they'll grab a piece of your cheek, your saliva, and they'll put it in a DNA identifier, which will likely be hooked up to their iPhones, by the way. And there you go. Your database shows up. And the thing with DNA, here's the interesting thing about DNA. People say, well, it's no big deal. It's just another biometric like a fingerprint. No, it's not. What happens with DNA is they've got you figured out. Because now that they've mapped the human genome, they can go in and they can literally put your DNA up against the human genome and figure out, where you're strong, where you're weak, where your tendencies are. And it becomes a very interesting for them piece to go in and begin to manipulate or address at a genetic level. So the whole DNA thing is going to be a big, big deal, and it's coming. It's coming in 2013. But right now, what we're dealing with is we're dealing with Libya, and we're dealing with what happened last week on the 12th of September. If you go to my website, robertphoenix.com, you can see that I have a fairly large piece on it, and I did it from the astrological perspective, which is the manipulation of the South Node, which is in Taurus. And what I tried to put together there was this Taurus as a symbol of fundamentalism and the manipulation of fundamentalism, whether it's Islamic fundamentalism or Christian fundamentalism or Judaic fundamentalism. What we're going to be seeing here is we're going to be seeing something that is getting right to the heart of sort of a broadside manipulation or a very generalized manipulation. And fundamentalism can be manipulated because it's extreme. And, there are people that believe that all three of the great religions, or great if you want to call it great, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism were all started by the high priests of Babylon many, 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 many years ago, and that they were all basically created as forms of control. I'm not sure I'd buy that completely, although I would entertain the possibility that at least two or three, or if they weren't created to be controlled at that point, certainly in the future, because certainly we can see what's taking place with fundamental Christianity and Judaism. And there are strange bedfellows, very strange bedfellows. A lot of what you would call progressive, liberal Jews would really be aghast of fundamentalist Christians in a philosophical sense. But when you drill down and get into, here's that word again, the DNA of fundamentalist Christians, you'll find that there is a very, very cozy relationship with Judaism and Israel. And in fact, it's not just cozy, it's fiduciary. There's a lot of money that moves from this country via the networks of people like Pat Robertson and John Hagee and what's his name, Tim LaHaye, and any number, Crespo Dollar, T.D. Jakes. I mean, you name it, these guys are moving cash from their parishioners, from their networks to Israel. What's his name? Morris Cerullo, another guy. They send millions and millions of dollars each year to Israel, and they do a lot of these events where they, because Israel plays a huge role in the story of Revelation, huge role. Like, you can't have a divided Israel. You can't have a Palestinian state. You can't have an Israeli state, because theoretically in Revelation, Israel needs to stand as one nation in order for Revelation to come true. So they invest all this money, all this time, creating a very cozy relationship with Israel between their brand of Pentecostal dispensationalist ideology and the Licudic Zionist government of Israel. And Israel, trust me, loves the money. And all these guys, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell before him, Big John Hagee, they take literally thousands of people over to the Holy Land every year to wail at the wall, to wear yarmulkes, to get into the Old Testament. So what we have here, you have this morphine of Christianity. And I did a piece on this many years ago on my website, many years ago. And one of the pieces it's all about mind control. It was all about the mutation and morphine of religion. And one of the symbols that I found was the Star of David with a cross inside the Star of David. This is actually a fairly prominent symbol of an emerging version of Christianity that's been taking root over the last 20 to 25 years in this country. And in that version, the end times, of course, play a very large role. Jesus comes back as Rambo. And what does he do? If you are Jewish infidel and you do not swear your allegiance to God in heaven and his only Son, then you are smoted. You are done, gone. Okay, so you get one shot. And then if you don't do it, Jesus and his angels, whatever, by any means necessary, they take you out. Now, this is an important thing to understand. Now, what happens here is that somewhere along the way, because at some point, it's a weird relationship. At some point, the Jewish faith went from being the ones that were infidels and the ones, theoretically, that killed Jesus, even though it was done by a fellow by the name of Longinus, who was a soldier of the Holy Roman Emperor in the army. But there's a level of collusion there at a fairly high level. And theoretically, these are the guys that killed your Savior, right? Well, now what happens? You've got this really cozy, copacetic, buddy-buddy relationship with the guys that killed, if you're Christian, your Savior. Now, what's happened is that over the last 10 years, the message has morphed. And it's now not the Israelis or the people of the Jewish faith or anything like that are the enemies. It's the Muslims. And so this whole end-time fairy tale has now been kind of morphed to the infidels being the Muslims. And now what we have, or what we're seeing, is this crusade, this holy war, which is being fomented by what happened last week. If you go to my website, robertphoenix.com, I talk about this. And one of the interesting components to this is the day that it happened on the 12th of September, and everybody says, well, okay, it's one day after 9/11, but not a lot of people know that September 12th is actually the feast day of Mother Mary. So this is the mother of Jesus, and this gets back to this whole notion of what Rick Clay and some other researchers have talked about, which is the original birthday of Jesus being 9/11. It's an interesting fact to take in, that this might have actually been his birthday. And the Catholic Church seems to corroborate this by having his mother's feast day, or his mother. It's not like a birthday, but it is the day where Mother Mary is honored. This is the mother of Jesus, and it's the 12th of September, and this is when this event takes place. And when you look at who died, and, I just want to say to the Stevens family that, my heart goes out to you. You lost somebody in a way that is really perfidious. And I'm very sorry that this has taken place. This is not how you want a good man to have his life end, to be the catalyst for what could be the Third World War, and not just a catalyst in a way that at some point, maybe we all have to lay our lives down for truth. Okay, again, this is the Western Christ model. Well, I will say this though, and this is an important thing. If you do believe in that model, and you do believe that Jesus did die for your sin, that means that the crucifixion in your own life doesn't have to take place, okay? Just remember that. It doesn't have to take place. So you may not necessarily have to die in that way. That is a myth, all right? That is an archetypal myth that is deeply woven into our collective consciousness and is played out over and over and over again. Now, you may have to die to this world, and that's a wholly different thing. And that's not such a bad thing based upon what I'm seeing with the world these days. But you don't have to be a reenactment of Christ, okay? It's just the way it is. But what we did see that reenactment take place on 9/12, the day of the Virgin. And the person who died was Christopher Stevens, okay? Christopher Christopher. Ophir is the word Ophir, O-P-H-I-R, which is, when you translate it into Hebrew, it's like abundance or gold or title, or it's an interesting sort of, it's a term that represents eternity. Okay, that's what Ophir is. It's everlasting, shining, abundant eternity. And it is mammon, really, on one level. On another level, it is the eternal soul. It's an alchemical word, Ophir. Christ. So now we have Christ, and we have the alchemical immanent meaning of gold in the word Christopher. And then Stevens is interesting because it represents Saint Stephen, who was a martyr. He was one of the first martyrs other than Jesus. So we have this double martyrdom with Christopher Stevens. It's symbolic when you look at the picture that we see of him being dragged out of the consulate by whoever those guys are. His arms are stretched out, and he becomes an imitation of Christ. He becomes a sacrificial lamb for what's now taking place. So what is taking place now? Well, we're seeing this uprising of anti-American sentiment in the Middle East. Now, I have to ask you, there's a very interesting question to ask you. If the pictures from Abu Ghraib did not cause an uprising, then how could this movie produced by, Nakula Baseli Nakula, how could it be the catalyst? I mean, those pictures from Abu Ghraib were some of the most shocking things I had ever seen. At that point, when I saw those pictures, I was embarrassed to be an American. And that was the point of the pictures, by the way. Degradation, demoralization, that's what those pictures were about. And I was embarrassed. I was ashamed to be an American at that time, to see that this is what my country was doing. So what do you do with that? Then you go inside yourself, you change a few things around. It's like, okay, well, I'm not an American, I'm a human. As a human, I'm ashamed. Okay, all right, well, now what? Well, then you go to the next level. It's like, okay, as somebody who is having a human experience, I feel pity. I feel pity on those people. I'm still a little ashamed. But then somehow you kind of massage it, manage it, and the next thing you know, you're kind of living with it. And then it goes down the 24-hour news cycle whirlpool. Liddy England, who can forget her? But what I'm trying to say here is that if Abu Ghraib did not incite World War III, then how could this shitty film made on a shoestring budget, which nobody saw, yet managed to be translated into the local dialects of both Libya and Egypt and run locally, not just on YouTube, by the way, but run on local cable in those countries? How could that have taken place? Well, it took place because there was a comprehensive plan for this to occur. And if you dig deep, if you really dig deep, you'll find that they knew that there was going to be an event at that embassy. And the soldiers, the Marines who guard the embassy, were told not to fire on people. And not only that, apparently they were given blanks, or they didn't have any ammo at all. It's not clear, but they couldn't defend themselves against, this horde that descended upon them and killed Ambassador Stevens and 3 other people. So now what do we have? We've got this mess that's taking place right now, and trust me, it's not going away, not in the least. So let's just read a little. Here's a little background on Mr. Nakula, who, by the way, is a certified government informant. He was on probation. He was in jail, and how he got out of jail is he decided to become a stool pigeon. So this is just from Yahoo News, and this is just to give you kind of a background. And what we have here is the picture. I'm going to put this as a link in the chat room. If you're listening live, you could actually see this link. And the link is a little disturbing here. Here we go. So I put that in there, and now that's in the chat room. There we go. And when you see the link, you can see that there is a group of children. These are children. They are like my kids' age. And they're raising their hands in the air, and they've got their fingers pointed upwards. And as a photo, let's just dissect this photo for a moment. If you're an American, right, and let's say you're whipped into this polarized us versus them, black versus white, you name it, dichotomy, and you see what's happening there as a kind of a surface event, like they hate us because we're free, right? How is this picture going to impact you or those people? I'll tell you how it's going to impact you or those people if you're in that group, because you'll see all these kids, right? And you'll say to yourself, my God, look at that. It's children. And these children are enraged. And not only are these children enraged, but guess what? They're going to grow up to be the terrorists of tomorrow. And we got to go in and we got to wipe out these kids. That's the message. That is the message. And there's also a message of defiance. It's like, screw you, we're kids, we're owning you right now. You're being owned by kids. That's the other message. So we got to break this stuff down, but I'll read you what it says here. The anti-Muslim film implicated in mob protests against U.S. diplomatic missions in the Mideast received logistical help from a man once convicted of financial crimes and featured actors who complained that their inflammatory dialogue was dubbed in after filming. You can bet it was. The self-proclaimed director of Innocence of Muslims initially claimed a Jewish and Israeli background, but others involved in the film said his statements were contrived as evidence mounted that the film's key player was a Southern Californian Coptic Christian with a checkered past. Nakula Baseli Nakula, 55, told the Associated Press in an interview outside Los Angeles Wednesday that he managed logistics for the company that produced Innocence of Muslims, which mocked Muslims and the Prophet Muhammad. The movie has been blamed for inflaming mobs that attacked U.S. missions in Egypt and Libya this week, as well as the U.S. Embassy in Yemen. On Thursday, Nakula denied he had directed the film, though he said he knew the self-described filmmaker Sam Basile. Nakula, Baseli, Nakula, Sam Basile, please. But the cell phone number that the AP contacted Tuesday to reach the filmmaker, who identified himself as Basile, traced to the same address near Los Angeles where Nakula was located. Nakula told the AP he is a Coptic Christian and supported the concerns of Christian Copts. Christian Copts, interesting, isn't it? about their treatment by Muslims. The film was implicated in the protests that resulted in the burning of the U.S. consulate Tuesday in the eastern Libyan city of Benghazi. Libyan officials said Wednesday that Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other embassy employees were killed during the mob violence, but U.S. officials now say they're investigating whether the assault was a planned terrorist strike linked to Tuesday's 11-year anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. Nakula denied he posed as Basile. Federal court papers filed in 2010 criminal prosecution against him said Nakula had used numerous aliases in the past. Among the fake names, the document said, were Nakula Basile and Erwin Salame. During a conversation outside his home, Nakula offered his driver's license to show his identity, but kept his thumb over his middle name, Basile. Record checks by the AP subsequently found that middle name as well as other connections to the Basile persona. The AP located Basile after obtaining a cell phone number from Morris Sadek, a conservative Coptic Christian in the U.S. who promoted the anti-Muslim film in recent days on his website. Egypt's Christian Coptic populace has long decried what they describe as a history of discrimination and occasional violence from the country's Arab majority. Pastor Terry Jones of Gainesville, Florida, who sparked outrage in the Arab world when he burned Qurans on the 9th anniversary of 9/11, said he spoke to the movie's director on the phone Wednesday and prayed for him. Jones said he has not met the filmmaker in person, but added that the man contacted him a few weeks ago about promoting the movie. Jones and others who have dealt with the filmmaker said Wednesday that Basile was hiding his real identity. I have not met Sam Basile. That is not his real name, Jones said. I talked to him on the phone. He is definitely in hiding and does not reveal his identity. He was quite honestly fairly shook up concerning the events, what is happening. A lot of people are not supporting him. He was generally a little shook up concerning the situation. Jeez. You think? The YouTube account under the name Sam Basile, which was used to publish excerpts of the provocative movie, was used to post comments online as recently as Tuesday, including defense of the film in Arabic. It is a 100% American movie, you cows. Of course that would be said. Nakula, who talked gloatedly about his role, pleaded no contest in 2010 to federal bank fraud charges in California and was ordered to pay more than $790,000 in restitution. He was also sentenced for 21 months in federal prison and ordered not to use computers or the internet for 5 years without approval from his probation officer. Okay, so he used the internet, right? He used the internet. It is a violation of parole. YouTube is the internet last time I checked. So what was he doing? What do you think he was doing? $790,000 is a lot of money, by the way. And he managed to raise $5 million for a film. So he's got money. Where's the money coming from? That is the big question. It says here, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Lee Williams said Nakula set up fraudulent bank accounts using stolen identities and social security numbers. Then checks from those accounts would be deposited into other bogus accounts from which Nakula would withdraw money at ATM machines. It was basically a check-kiting scheme, the prosecutor told the AP. He tried to get the money out of the bank before the bank realizes they're drawn from a fraudulent account. Good Christian, huh? I mean, yeah, I get it. This is a way to get back at the money lenders. That's brilliant. And then turns around and uses the money to help people. It's liberation check-kiting. American actors and actresses who appeared in Innocence of Muslims issued a joint statement Wednesday saying they were misled about the project and alleged that some of their dialogue was crudely dubbed during post-production. In the English language version of the trailer, direct references to Muhammad appear to be the result of post-production changes to the movie. Either actors aren't seen when the name Muhammad is spoken in the overdub sound, or they appear to be mouthing something else as the name of the prophet is spoken. The entire cast and crew are extremely upset. Basile told the AP he was an Israeli-born 56-year-old Jewish writer and director, but a Christian activist involved in the film, Steve Klein, told AP on Wednesday that Basile was a pseudonym and that he was a Christian. Klein had told the AP on Tuesday that the filmmaker was an Israeli Jew who was concerned for family members who live in Egypt. So one day, Klein is saying that he's an Israeli Jew. Basile is saying he was Israeli born. He also said that the money was raised, he told actors that the money was raised, $5 million was raised by through the Jewish real estate community in California. That was what he told people. Officials in Israel said there was no record of Basile as an Israeli citizen. When the AP initially left a message for Basile, Klein contacted the AP from another number to confirm the interview request was legitimate. Then Basile called back from his own cell phone. Klein said he didn't know the real name of the man he called Sam. He came to him for advice. So if he doesn't know his real name, how the hell does he know where he's from? That's what I want to know. About 15 key players from the Middle East, people from Syria, Iraq, Turkey, Pakistan, and Iran, and a couple of Christian cops worked on the film. Klein said, Klein has a lot of knowledge about this. Most of them won't tell me their real names because they're terrified, Klein said. He was really scared. And now he's so nervous, he's turned off the phone. Don't make the film. Southern Poverty Law Center, which monitors hate groups, said Klein is a former Marine, a longtime religious right activist who helped train paramilitary militias at the California Church. Described Klein as founder of Courageous Christians United, who conducts protests outside of abortion clinics, Mormon temples, and mosques. A lot of these groups, by the way, are fronts, okay? They are fronts, and they are created to appear to be the angry white Christian male. They're fronts. All we have to do is look at what happened with Tim McVeigh and the Waco bunch who had been infiltrated, and they became a front. Says here, Hollywood and California film industry groups and permit agencies said they had no records of the project under the name Innocents and Muslims. But a Los Angeles film permit agency later found a record of a movie filmed in Los Angeles last year under the working title Desert Warriors. A man who answered the phone, listed for the Vine Theater, a faded Hollywood movie house, confirmed that the film had run for at least a day, and possibly longer, several months ago, arranged by a customer known as Sam. Google Inc., which owns YouTube, pulled down the video Wednesday in Egypt, citing a legal complaint. It was still accessible in the U.S. and other countries. So one of the things, and this is what Sarson had brought up to me in an email, is that this is really potentially quite a deal for censorship, net censorship. Just curious, why do people enter the chat room under a guest name and not talk? Not participate. Just a question. That's all. Just a question. So now we're dealing with this, and it's not going to go away, boys and girls. This is not going to go away. This is going to be a big keynote here, especially as we're running up to the election, and especially as we're dealing with the budgets, the military budgets, and all that stuff coming up at the end of the fiscal year for the feds on October 1st. And this event will be talked about ad nauseum on Capitol Hill in the Budget Committee meetings and on the floor of the House and the Senate. And what will take place is more money, a lot more money, because apparently Obama was going to go cut the military budget. That was sort of, those were the whispers. And I doubt that's going to happen now. Yesterday I was at a restaurant / sports bar in Alameda County, place near my house. And I do this once a year. I get together with some people that I know from the message board. And these are not, I mean, they listen to my show every now and then, and I love them dearly, but politically they're very different stripe. And I was sitting down watching the game, and it was the 49ers were having a really good time. And one of the fellows who was there, and God bless him, I love him, he's a retired police officer from Central California. And he's a detective at that, so he's a sharp guy. And he's in his 80s. He's one of my favorite people. And he said to one of the other people who was there at the event from Australia, he's like, hey, we're going to lend you some of our army to go down there and take care of those Muslims in Australia. And I think that this is really sort of this is the vox populi. This is what people who don't want to get in and entangle these things. This is how they deal with it. And they deal with Islam as a serious threat. And conversely, there are people who are part of my Facebook group, one of which who I think is really bright and seriously impassioned and ballsy and tells the truth to the best of her ability. She's very much in the Muslim camp and basically saying, well, they're persecuted, that all the Muslims she meets are peaceful people, and, really the bad guys here are the Jews, and we got to get the Jews, and let's leave the Muslims alone. We're supposed to practice religious tolerance as part of this country. Everybody can practice their faith here. That's like the completely opposite and polarized view. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, to be honest with you. I'm not sitting on a fence here, but I know that this is being gamed and staged, and basically what's taking place is that they're pitting ideologies and people against one another. It's been going on for quite a while, but it's really heated up, let's face it, since 9/11, 2001. And are the folks in Tel Aviv involved in this? Absolutely, up to their eyeballs, but also inside of these governments now, inside of the Muslim Brotherhood, there are also people that are involved up to their eyeballs. And what they do is they mobilize people very quickly. Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, has been connected to MI5 and MI6 for many years, commonly known inside the intelligence community. The Muslim Brotherhood is a front. So if you have this front organizing these protests or organizing these actions, then there's some collusion at a higher level. Now, that said, Jay Widener was on the show about a month and a half ago, and he talked about Islam as this encroaching ideology that was literally strangling Western and Northern Europe. And he's right. He's absolutely right. It is. And what's taken place here is that the UN has lifted, not only lifted, but the UN has actually forced countries like France and Holland and England, Germany and Italy and Greece to take people from places like Libya, Yemen, Algeria, Turkey, you name it. They're literally forced to take these people into their societies, their communities, and then allow them to set up shop and allow them to practice their religion, their faith, and begin to dominate the local economies, and you name it. And here's the deal. And I'm not anti-Muslim. People can practice whatever they want. I don't give a shit. But if you look at the birth rate within the Muslim community, it is significant. If a Muslim family moves to Western Europe or Northern Europe, they're going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. And the normal Western and Northern European might have 1 or 2. Why? Because many years ago we were conditioned that the world was getting too crowded, and that we had to limit our resources. We had to limit our ability to procreate in order to keep the resources intact. And in fact, there was a movie that came out, I believe it was 1969 or 1970, called ZPG, Zero Population Growth, which was released at the box office, which talks about this. And of course, you have the Soylent Green meme, which really drove this home, right? So there's too many people. What's going to happen? We're going to cannibalize each other. We need dead people. That's not the movie they were showing in places like Turkey or Afghanistan or Pakistan or Libya or Egypt. No. Only here, okay? We were conditioned, and we've been conditioned to not have kids. And now, guess what? Now we have, and Freeman and I, oh, by the way, if you have not listened to the show with Freeman that we did on Friday, you've got to listen to it. It's a great show. And Freeman is a beacon of hope in this world. And I truly appreciate that. And I totally relate to Freeman. Freeman and I have kind of parallel life tracks in some ways. It's very, very interesting stuff. So listen to the show. And one of the things that Freeman talked about, and God bless him, because it's one of those things that's hard to talk about. It's the homosexual or the gay agenda. You know, I've lost friends over this. People have left me because I talk about it. I don't talk about it in a hateful way. Hopefully I don't. But it's an agenda. And part of it is, again, population control. Because, you know, not only, so we started with birth control and population control in the 60s. And that was chemical and to a certain extent ideological. And now we've moved into a whole different phase of this. And it's cultural. And so as a result, what's going to happen is that we'll have less traditional marriages, and we'll have less traditional families, less traditional childbirth, less childbirth in general. Meanwhile, in Islam, first of all, homosexuality, anathema. The weird part about that is that women are expected to be virgins. Okay, they're expected to be virgins when you marry them. So what happens between the time that a young man enters puberty to the time that he meets a woman and marries her and begins to have sex with her? Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of homosexual activity in the Muslim world because there is an agreement about, you know, man love, especially his boys. And then they grow up and they go through it and then they marry their wives and, you know, they're done, theoretically, right? So that's kind of a weird thing in and of itself. But what happens is that once they become married, they just procreate, and there's a lot of kids. It's a very different message. So now this is happening in Western Europe, and it's kind of destroying, in some ways, the fabric of certain communities. And I hate to say that, but that's just the way it is. And people will say, well, this is the new world. Just get used to it, you know. Multiculturalism, diversity, this is just where it's at. My experience of that is that it's not true. When I lived in Southern California, San Diego to be exact, I witnessed what was happening with the Mexican community, the Mexican-American community, not quite American yet, but still Mexican, is that when they would come to this country, especially in San Diego, they would enclave. And there would not be this dissemination of their culture into our culture. They would literally create these zones, these buffer zones, where they would have their own businesses. They would have their own, wouldn't be their own schools, although the public school in those areas would become their schools. And they'd have their own zones where nothing would really change. I mean, it was almost as if they would literally lift off in total a large swath of their culture from Mexico, transport it over the border, and then down into San Diego, and then just, continue to live. There was no diversity in their world from us. I didn't hear them listening to Bach or Beethoven. I didn't get that at all. And I got this firsthand because my son's nanny was Mexican. We hired her. There's a reason for that. We both worked. Made sure she had a license. I made sure she had a Social Security number. She did. She was a legal citizen, and she was a single mom, and we loved her. We loved her to death. We supported her. We supported her daughter. We treated her incredibly well. Gave her vacation every year, and she helped us out. She saved our lives. She came to me one day where, she got a car from this guy, and it was a piece of junk. And she asked me for my help, and I went with her. And I went with her to where she, got the car. And I talked to the guy who did not speak a lick of English. I used her as a translator. I entered into her world. And I saw what was taking place there. What was taking place was enclaving. So this is what happens. There's this whole idea and this whole notion of diversity and multiculturalism. It's a nice notion. And musically, I think some really cool things happen sometimes. I was in the music business. I would listen to these fusions of music that were tremendous and really inspiring. And sometimes you go to a restaurant, you have really great food. That's like a fusion. But I would say by and large, this doesn't always work, and it doesn't always take place the way it is sold to us. And so what we're seeing here in Western Europe and in Northern Europe is it's really the reordering of the face of Western Europe and North America too as well. It's a different model. It's the same model. It's a different manifestation of that model. Now, what would be, how could we deal with this? How could we all retain our quote-unquote rich cultural heritage? Because I'll tell you right now, the way that Islam is set up, being a Muslim is set up, is that there are pretty strict mandates. And there's a very rigid sort of codification inside of that world. That it's almost like a fortress. The West does not seep in. Rarely does it seep in. So that kind of diffusion is not necessarily going to take place. And yet it's supposed to, the West is supposed to be receptive and allow it to be itself to be changed. Why? Because we have no firewall. We have no firewall at all. Our firewall's been blown up. And that's just the way it is. So here we are. We're dealing with this, this crusade now. We're dealing with this whole notion of culture war. And it's just, it's all, Albert Pikean, Third World War kind of stuff. And this is kind of where we are right now. On the financial front, the banksters are selling their stocks. Pay attention to that. If you can get into gold, if you can get into silver right now, which, by the way, they're starting to have shortages of, I would highly, highly recommend it. Do it. Get it done. Buy yourself some metals. But better than metals, of course, always is a little bit of food and water on the side. It's always nice to have that. But if we are looking for signs that things are headed in a certain direction, if we're testing the wind, then these billionaires, not just millionaires, billionaires who are dumping stocks, follow the trend. Follow that trend. So even though I've spoken at great length here today about the notion of multiculturalism and diversity, which is theoretically at times a great notion, which produces some interesting art and some food, but not always an interesting mix, and can be a real failure, by the way, of culture, especially if it's forced. If it's organic, it's a whole different thing. even though I've been speaking at length about it today, and not necessarily in positive terms, I'll be honest about that. I think that there are some real positive things that we can learn from various religions and cultures. But my piece around this is that when it's forced, when we have to accept things, either way, by the way, then it's not necessarily cool. What would be my solution? I'll tell you what my solution would be, especially in Mexico. My solution would be to get the United States out of NAFTA, return Mexico to its sovereignty, and instead of Mexico being kind of a third world bedroom and major drug producer for North America, turn that economy around and empower the people of Mexico. That would be my solution. That would absolutely, entirely be my solution, at least for Mexico. Give them financial sovereignty, solidarity, and independence. But that's not necessarily going to happen. But while I'm talking about Mexico, and I'm talking about these topics today, which could be really touchy for some people, I understand that, I want to just take some time out to honor somebody who made a huge influence in my life, who was from Mexico. And I just found out the other day that he had passed away. And he passed away, actually, in 2009. And I just found out. I literally just found out on Friday because I went to YouTube. I was texting a friend, and we were texting on Skype and exchanging links, musical links, and I wanted them to experience his music. And I went to a piece of his music, and I found on YouTube that he had died. And his name was Jorge Reyes, and he was a huge influence in my life in the 1990s. His music was the soundtrack to my life in the 90s. And during that time, I was very into shamanism and psychedelic exploration, and his music was the soundtrack to that exploration. I actually went to Mexico and spent time with him in his home, all around Mexico City. He came here. I spent time with him in the U.S., and I truly loved Jorge. He was way ahead of his time musically, and he was deeply involved in the indigenous rights of the Huichol Indians and other groups in Mexico, and he produced a record with Psy-OP, the Spanish musician, called Crónica de Costas, which is a wonderful, wonderful piece of music about the various castes of people that were in Mexico and beyond. So the mulattoes, mestizos, you name it. So Jorge, I wanted to play you a piece of his music today, and so you can get a flavor of his music. And this is an interesting piece of music. It's called El Sendero Espiral, and really what it means is it means the spiral path. And this is from his record Bajo el Sol Jaguar, which means under the jaguar sun. It's one of my favorite records by him. And you can hear a lot of different elements in his music. But mostly what I want you to hear is the timelessness and the shamanic quality. And this is my send-off to Jorge, and I think it's an appropriate piece of music as he begins to spiral onto the next part of his path. So Jorge, I love you, and you were truly a force amongst humans. And this one is for you, Jorge Reyes. I'll see everybody on Wednesday, and I'll be breaking down the astrological matrix, as it were. Use your head to discern what's really hard to say than what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. This has been the Monday Mashup, and here's Jorge Reyes. God bless.